I came here looking for new music. I ended up conceding suicide has never sounded so appealing before.
Recently, one of my Facebook friends, yes, I use Facebook unironically. I do believe on our last episode I discussed the overall theme of this series is I am old, thank you very much, posted about her discovery of a thing called vent art. Especially how she was surprised to learn that everything she creates could be categorized as vent art. Me, being a person of culture, had no clue whatsoever of what the phrase vent art could mean. I immediately thought it was just another one of those internet kinks furry artists are forced to clog the Twitter lines with for money. Unfortunately, I'm also way too curious for my own sake, as the scars on my brain and psyche can attest. So I just had to Google it. But not before turning the save search button on, just in case. Turns out, vent art is basically what those two words would suggest. Art made to let out a negative feeling, usually anger or sadness. In essence, I was witnessing the live birth of Zoomers discover the real purpose of art, without even being aware of the historic importance of this event, while at the same time acting as the token millennial, one bad day away from becoming a boomer that I am. It's a tiresome cliche everyone that has devoted at least some time to a creative discipline has heard before. Oh honey, that must have felt terrible, right? Why don't you write a book about it to let it go? No, she's just going through a depression phase. She's been coping by drawing scary monsters and post-it notes for the better part of 2 decades now. We believe she'll be cured any minute now. Alright, now that you've finished your 3 hours long self-pity magnum opus, maybe we can start making normal movies again? You know, the ones that actually make money? I started this YouTube channel to act as therapy while I was mourning my mother's passing. And today I'll share with you the 7 tips to hook up with women on a beach. Let's get our sexes going, my soldiers of love. If we've not done any of these to some degree, we've at least thought about it. And if we haven't, are we even live? The reason this is a cliche is because, well, it works. There are few things as cathartic as laying down the loads of grief weighing down on our shoulders and transforming them into sketches for our next creative project. It lightens our life and, at the same time, lets an unsuspecting audience experience or relieve the most human of experiences, feeling sad for unnervingly long periods of time. But not all vent art pieces are created equal. Whatever Wattpad fanfic we write at the ripe age of 16 after, I don't know, being rejected publicly by yet another one of your high school crushes in the school's parking lot is bound to elicit nothing but expressions of pure cringe by any unfortunate soul that ends up finding it. Same goes for that self-published comic book full of inside jokes and edgy references you create after being let go from your minimum wage job in the service industry. The angry animated gifs someone made to chastise some anonymous TV exec for not supporting their favorite ship within a cartoon aimed at 10-year-olds. Mixtapes upon mixtapes of accordion-led free jazz pieces, retelling that one time your pew neighbor didn't grab your hand while praying Our Father in church. A video of yourself crying because the milk carton you bought that morning wasn't printed with the correct Pantones. You might get some relatable likes or reshares, but the effect you'll have on people won't be more than an, oh yeah, I felt a little bit like that, before forgetting your name forevermore. And that's if you're lucky. Digital cobwebs are a thing, a palpable thing. The one surefire way to attract attention and make a dent in the cultural landscape is to go as deep as sadness goes. Being depressed for the sake of it, or because capitalism has crushed you into a pancake of desolation, doesn't cut it anymore. You need to deliver freshly baked reminders of what being human means. And one of the most common fossil fuels of creativity is, no surprise here, the eternal reminder of our own mortality. Everyone will die. That's a fact we need to deal with every single day of our lives. We even thought about it in unnervingly realistic detail during kindergarten, using anatomically correct models and analogies of the void explained by puppets covered in blood and guts. We've all been there at least once, either as students or teachers. But somehow, we managed to shelve this knowledge on the back of our minds and function as normal living things without flinching too much about it. That is, unless someone close to us decides to refresh the memory of our impending expiration date by perishing before us. Then, and only then, will the dread finally hit the fan. Only then will we understand what dying truly means. Worse still if they took their own lives by their own volition. Oh, yeah, we are finite beings, and every single one of our actions can and will affect the people around us, especially the action of permanently not being there. The room we are in will become silent, just so our souls can scream in agonizing pain without voicing a sound. That's when you make a dance record out of it.
Where will the man then place God's dead?
Sounds like a brilliant social commentary piece that you're going to do. Can you still finish that answer?
Not spread out enough. Oh, it's getting better now. No way!
I couldn't help but laugh as soon as I started listening to For Those I Love's self-titled album. There wasn't anything inherently funny in the somber piano keys that start you up in the journey of the record, but I couldn't help but chuckle right at the 8 seconds mark. Suddenly, and without any sort of warning, one of the dreariest and thickest Irish accents in existence blared right into my ears the statement,
I have a love.
My laughter was born not of any sense of comedy or mockery, especially since the vocals are devoid of any hint of humor, let alone happiness, but as a human response to utter confusion. I was letting out a sonic "what the fuck" sans the use of any words. Whatever I could have expected given the progressive house tag, I was not ready to have an Irishman almost scream at me with the force of 7 gallons of tears right inside my ear. In all honesty, I didn't know what to expect as soon as I loaded the tracks on my phone, but in less than 10 seconds, For Those I Love somehow managed to subvert all my expectations. As soon as I understood the sort of territory I was in, I had to repeat the track not even a minute in. I knew I wasn't giving it the attention it deserved. The way that I was trying to consume this product was far removed from what it demanded from me. I had to physically recalibrate myself in order to listen. Actually listen. And yet, the differences in my stance were nigh indistinguishable. Other than leaning a little bit forward, I'd seem as stoic as I was when I sat down on my couch a couple minutes ago. I was still almost lying down on the recliner, a pair of headphones clasping my head circumference, and a smartphone screen reflecting the lyrics back on my retinas. But my brows were a little bit more puckered now. I was in serious mode. My brain and spirit needed to be vibrating at a completely different frequency, and my face had to reflect it somehow. Can't blame the album really, this was my fault. I'd had a false start after all. By not knowing what I was getting into beforehand, I had poised myself to fail at listening to this album. After seeing its place on the best albums of 2021 listicle, I couldn't help but ready myself to be instantly mind blown. My unconscious expected some traditionally beautiful notes that would exceed any human composition previously crafted by man. Something that would make my head bob and my feet dance. I expected something that would lighten my mood and have me hum the same catchy tune for days. Instead, I was being presented by a piece of art. A direct attack to feels, aimed squarely at that part of your brain that decides whether you're supposed to feel elated or depressed. In the dichotomy of happiness and sadness, For Those I Love was aiming at the latter. Its experience would not function correctly as long as I was not ready to be on the verge of tears. This was not a record you were supposed to enjoy. And yet, David Balfe, the man behind For Those I Love, keeps explaining on interviews that it actually is. This is not a collection of songs brought forth by tragedy, but a celebration of life, he says. Of one particular individual's life, to be accurate. It was 2018 when a man by the name of Phil Curran chose to end his own life. He was a poet and a musician, but above all, he was a human being. The details of the whys and hows are something that have eluded the internet up to this very day, But whatever the reasons he thought he had for doing what he did aren't important in the least. What's significant is the fact that he committed suicide, and that, by doing so, he left a handful of people behind to pick up the pieces of the consequences of his decision. The people that remained are the ones that were touched by his actions. He simply died. And whether you believe in an afterlife, reincarnation, or the eternal void of nothingness, in the end, the ones affected the most by a death are the ones that keep on living. By taking himself out of the equation, Curran had indirectly tasked his loved ones to carry the burden that he, presumably, thought he was relieving himself of. This metaphorical load soon became a tangible object, made visible only by the lack of his physical presence forevermore. Inevitably, the feelings of his not being there eventually evolved into a chaos that haunted an insurmountable amount of time for the people that survived him. He, once a human being, quickly became an inescapable void for his friends. These feelings of complete and utter helplessness are what fueled Balfi to create this album. He was aiming to exorcise himself of the demons instilled in him by the loss of his best friend. But Balfi is, above all, an artist. He understands the power of music, not only for the person that's creating it, but also to whoever lends him an ear. He understands the black hole of despair he had been sunk into without a moment's notice, and as such, understands the effect his art would have on his audience if he focused on the negative aspects of living through such an ordeal. If done without care, he'd push forward the percentage of his audience that was already on the verge. That is the main reason he wanted to flip the script, to create something on which he could vent all his frustrations, all his unsaid words of affection, and transform it into an ode that celebrates the life of one of the most important persons in his life. That's the reason this album, as well as his moniker for the project, have the word love so prominently within them. He wants to focus on the way Curran made him feel while alive, on the details that made him the unique individual that inspired so many people, not on how he destroyed him by dying. And yet, despite everything he consciously tasked himself to do, despite setting clear goals for him to walk towards, it is almost impossible to not let your subconscious and the feelings clasping it within their claws to pilot your creative vehicles without your consent. Balfi might have wanted to celebrate someone's life, but every image of fondly remembrance he sonically employs to remember Paul is sewn together by the dark threads unraveled by someone that feels tired of life itself, that resents having to slog through the grayness of contemporary existence every single day. As much time as we spend listening about what made Curran himself, his likes and dislikes, his demeanor and humor, we spend the same amount of time enumerating the reasons why growing up poor within the boundaries of a country that deems you an inferior citizen based solely on the geography that saw you being born will inevitably kill you, whether in soul or body. But I didn't know any of that while immersing myself in the world of For Those I Love's opening track. I was simply letting myself drift on the droning beats of the same 4 keyboard keys being struck in an endless loop of deafening sadness. The second-person narrative lyrics and the samples of a seemingly random group of friends laughing and telling jokes at each other meant nothing to me at that point. They were but cool oral ideas that I thought gave more weight to the words uttered by Balfi about the importance of loving your friends and being close to them. But as the lyrics became darker and sadder, and the beats backing them became louder and more focused on making your joints unconsciously move, I started to suspect there was a piece I was missing. The ebbs and flows of a dance ritual accompanied the ever more private accounts of specifics and memories spouted by Balfi, urging you to dance without caring the world, while also hitting every word that came out of his lips with all the attention you can muster. It wasn't until he started describing how he had shown that very same tune I was listening to his friends inside a car that I knew something was up. I started questioning what the meaning behind these colorful passages of someone's life actually meant. And as I did, Balfi dropped the line that piqued my interest and transfigured this from just another album into experience I'm glad I took part in.
Cause I have a love and it'll never fade, and either will you, Paul.
Who the fuck is Paul? Was my immediate reaction. I had to pause the stream in order to vocally ask that question out loud. Who the fuck is Paul? This album had a backstory, and I needed to do my homework. Digging into For Those I Love's lore was mandatory in order to fully appreciate the madness my headphones were blasting right towards the middle of my brain. Otherwise, I'd be experiencing no more than 50% of what has been offered to me. And if you go out of your way to look for something you're only going to consume half of it due to laziness, what is even the point? Listening to this album suddenly started feeling like going back to college, but like one where you didn't even enroll in and you just wake up one morning and you already have to hand in a homework before 7 a.m. I felt like I had to do an entire research paper before I ever placed a foot on the lecture hall if I wanted to grasp all the concepts thrown my way without a sliver of a pause to ask the teacher. I had to know things in order to listen to these songs, specific things, but above all, I just had to know. So I hit up Google again. My keywords were For Those I Love Paul. Once I pressed enter, I was bombarded by dozens upon dozens of think pieces, discussing not only the inspiration of the album, but also eulogizing Paul Curran and his myriad of works. He was someone I had never heard of before, and in a matter of 5 minutes and one Google search, I was becoming obsessed by everything he represented. How could someone that had inspired tens of artists on a country I'd never been to suddenly mean so much to me when I didn't even know his face? Along the lines of countless authors who were forcing themselves to remember him through keyboard strikes on their computers, I could sense the importance of someone like Paul Curran within the art community of whichever country destiny had him being born in. He was a working class man that loved football and art, someone that, despite being alive and politically active during the late 2010s, still harbored a glimpse of hope for the youth and what they, as a group, could achieve towards global change. He was a spoken word poet, a musician, a multimedia artist. He also possessed a soothing voice, capable of convincing anyone with a smidgen of hope to follow him in his endeavors.
I was walking through the scheme last week and contemplated the year and all. The global shock, the reporting of Fox, the building of the wall. About Brexit and Trump, continued housing slumps, the words of Nigel Farage, the pox. The Syrian war, refugees on the shore, the black bodies pierced with lead lay dead by an army of brainwashed cops. We thought about Putin and the Russian athletes not shooting up. The near 50 Latino dead in Orlando's Pulse nightclub. But then I stop and think a bit about the questions that need to be asked and realise the fact that life is the presence of race and class. And then I see 2016 was a year that kept open eyes. The Black Lives Matter are pressing that fight. Kendrick continues to write. Ex-Labourer McGregor held 2 belts up high and Skepta won a Mercury Prize. The year to take advice and prompt the young to rise. So build your wall, take it all, and tear the world apart. So I know what side me and mine are on, where the youth still own the earth.
Those are the very characteristics of Paul that Balfe borrowed in order to create a self-titled debut. He writes potent lines about the reality that surrounds him without so much as a hint of a metaphor to sugarcoat his message. These are harsh lines about a harsh time and place. Depression, poorness, death, police brutality, everything is depicted as gritty as every superhero movie of the 2000s wished they could have been. And the way Balfe delivers these rhymes is as potent as the imagery contained within the words. You start to feel how he must have felt when dealing with his everyday conditions. Every gut punch, maximized tenfold by the samples and ready-to-dance beats behind it all, creating an emotional dissonance. I needed to restart the album for a third time after learning about all of this. I felt I was finally ready to undergo the eulogy of happiness Balfe had tricked himself into thinking he'd made. For starters, I forced my face to disconnect every muscle tasked with creating smiles on my facade. I had laughed once, and I wouldn't make that same mistake twice. As I pressed play again, I had been banned from feeling any sort of positive feeling during my listening session of For Those I Love. When I woke up that morning, I wasn't planning on fighting yet another bout of depression that week, let alone a self-inflicted one. But I needed to pay my respect for the artistry I was being presented with by, at least, feeling sad. I felt like I was in capable hands. Despite the heaviness of the main theme of the record plastered in bold letters at the forefront of my mind, I never felt it waning over me. David Balfe has this innate talent of making you enjoy his diatribes of important topics. He shares ideas, solutions. He denounces the evils of what the upper class consider truth and love so effortlessly that it was impossible for me not to go along. Even his graphic description of a corruption lad in Dublin weren't alien to me, as I could pinpoint similar occurrences being reported not even 10 miles away from my doorstep. Balfe goes hard, both lyrically and sonically, taking you by the hand without feeling like he is hand-holding you. He expects you to know about the world and its evil, only to shine some of its goodness back at your unsuspecting face. That's how I swayed from one piece to another. One minute I was remembering things that had never happened to me, like having my friends over for dinner in the art shed my parents had built for us, only to be quickly briefed about the actual figures and numbers of desolation and futurelessness that have branded Dublin's working class as the nobodies. His accent had attracted me, but the high-pitched samples acting as hooks caught me. I could feel every borrowed beat tingling down my spine and almost forcing me to smile. I didn't, but I could feel the urge to. But as soon as Balfe lent me his eyes to witness the body of a beaten-to-death man die before my 9-year-old self, I remember the two words that attempted to describe the kind of music I was listening to. The two words that had me build up a blurry silhouette of expectancy before I knew anything about the artist, whose work I was in the middle of gobbling through interconnected tears. Progressive house. Now, I am not an expert on the terminology and distinctions of the many subgenres of electronic music. I can only couple up a vague idea of what house music sounds like due to a handful of experiences of illegal raves within the outskirts of my hometown. And the word progressive harkens me back to the afternoons I spent listening to Yes LPs with my father back when my H numbers ended with the suffix teen. I simply meshed those two concepts in my head in order to mentally prepare myself for this album. And while I could somewhat understand the logic behind tagging this album as such, if seen through the eyes of an electronic music connoisseur, the person that I am now, more versed on pop music than anything else, had only one question. Isn't this just hip-hop? Think about it. Most, if not all of the music, has been created by stitching together a myriad of samples, both from personal recordings of the producer or by cool motifs and or riffs of famous songs from decades past. The lyrics are constructed by rhyming words using different meter structures in order to give them form and punch. These are later recited with a specific cadence and speed that is maintained only for the duration of a song, seldom repeated anywhere else on the record. The majority of the hooks are comprised of sample vocals from other tunes that have been cut and remixed to fit the tone and or cadence of the track they have been placed in. The themes and ideas notwithstanding, this is a white dude rapping over beats produced with the same idiosyncrasy of 90s era death row. This particular dude is good at it. He delivers his lines with the heaviness, unworldliness he needs to in order to get his point across. But this is good old conscious hip-hop if I ever heard it. I understand the need of utilizing the progressive house genre as a flag. That's the kind of music Balfe enjoyed making. It's the culture he has immersed himself in, the one that has given him thousands of hours of memorable gig experiences during his teens. But I think it's also a deterrent for any unsuspecting listener that arrives at this album. Many people have pointed out that descriptor is precisely the thing that builds up some expectations that are promptly busted by actually giving the piece a chance. This is why the consensus of critics is a unanimous cry of certification as a masterpiece, but most people that leave the reviews of the album online just cannot understand why this is getting so much praise. Where's the house in my house record? I didn't want poetry in my dance music. They are coming from a background specialized in beats that make you party, that make the insides of your lungs shiver with the intensity of a double or triple bass, and what they encounter is something that requires them to open their mind and heart to someone who bears his soul before them, expecting nothing but a moment of their time to listen to the rawness that has destroyed a portion of his spirit. Someone that is mending his heart at the same time he talks to you through your stereo. This is a naked soul speaking, and most people were looking for some audio cues that would help them get physically naked. The other difference between genre tag and actual product is most evident when one listens to the instrumental version of the album. No lyrics, no spoken word, no samples of people speaking. Just instrumental beats and the ready-made samples that make the majority of them bounce to a specific rhythm. It's a completely different experience. These are tunes you can bob your head to without worrying about how finite life is. These are tracks you can use as the background noise of your next get-together with your friends. Pieces you can jog to any given Sunday morning in order to break a sweat before making breakfast for your wife. If you strip Balfi's lyrics off of the album, you're also stripping away any influence that Paul's demise brought into the project. What you are left with is a collection of ideas made by an aspiring musician that are meant to sound nice in the middle of a Spotify playlist created for the first half of a party. Something you use to kill time while your guests are eating some crisp and getting to know each other prior to getting drunk. They're technically impressive, showcasing the abilities of Balfi as an artist, but they say absolutely nothing. They're vent art without any vents. Proof of that is the fact that while For Those I Love robbed me of the opportunity of an early sleep by replacing my tiredness with a hurdle of philosophical questions of how much do I really matter for the people that matter to me, I used the instrumental version as the background sound that swayed me into the dream world on more than 2 occasions. These are two beasts apart, completely dissimilar interpretations of the exact same groundwork, but enjoyable in their own right. The main difference is that one is empty and the other is meant to rip your stomach apart from too much pondering. The official remixes For Those I Love has released complement the theory that this has been mislabeled.
You've all been very kind and I'm extremely grateful for that.
Plain and simple, they suck. But not because the artists remixing them are bad or anything like that, but because they are excellent examples of their trade and genre. The remixers approach these pieces as they would any other song of their particular music scene. In essence, their works explain precisely why this piece had no business being released as something born from the electronic scene. While most of them keep Balfi's raps almost as is, they decide to replace the moody tunes of the original versions with upbeat disasters that want to command you to get up, consume some drugs, and move your body at the same speed of the BPMs. The remixes taint everything the album set itself to achieve by their mere existence. Even if they have been officially sanctioned by Balfi himself, they feel like a disservice to everything the album achieves. And don't get me wrong, the instrumentals and remix music are bangers. They are tracks any FPS video game trailer would love to get their hands on in order to pump potential customers, but they are made with an electronic state of mind. If they had absolutely no connection to this record, I would have probably loved them. The cop-based nature of traditional remixes drains Balfi's lines of any weight and punch imbued into them by the tragedy. It feels like the mockery of death rather than the glorification of a life I assume they were intended to be. It's more of an I'm so glad this dude died. Now I can dance on his grave while getting drunk. Woo! Rather than the he left us, but he would have loved for us to continue dancing in his honor. That the original project achieves from the first track's bridge. It's better to skip the remixes altogether. You will find nothing there but unsavory dread that leaves a parched taste in your mouth. If we can assume God exists, this is what she would call heresy. I approach For Those I Love, the album, as an excuse to expand my mental music catalog with names and rhythms I wasn't aware of. As such, I wanted to like it from the get-go. I had poised myself to love it. I mean, it was the best album of 2021 so far. Why would I not fall head over heels for it? However, as the song queue was almost nearing its end, I was left with a hole in my soul the size of an original Game Boy. I both feared and embraced my own mortality. These 12 songs made me question things that I take for granted, as well as instill the need to be closer to my friends and family. It made me feel things for people I would never be able to meet in my life. As David Balfi took off his spiritual clothing for me through my headphones, as he let himself be vulnerable and on the edge of tears for almost an hour, I was able to connect with him, to feel things I had no business feeling, but that had now become my feelings from now on. But I was also left with the unescapable feeling of someone asking me to dance to the beat of their mourning. A beat that is unequivocally individual, but that for a brief moment in time became a shared heartbeat, happening on different times and spaces. I love what For Those I Love managed to create, and I cannot wait to see what he will create next. Even if I fear the nature of this project means that there's nothing else to say under that moniker. I just wish there were more people listening to this. I mean, this is awesome. What the fuck are these numbers supposed to mean? We are glad you sacrificed so much and worked so hard. Now, we will collectively ignore you. Thank you very much. I mean, come on. This is the first episode. I know it's the second video I upload, but this is the first episode. The other one was like an introduction thingy, that's why it's called demo episode. I listened to it a couple of times while I was working on it, on the edit and whatever, and I noticed a lot of things I believe I didn't do as well as I should have. One of them was my voice, assuming that this take is the good one. For this one, I decided to go with a happier tone, something a little bit more laid back. I don't know if it's gonna work. But if it does or if it doesn't, I would really appreciate you telling me if it works. I need feedback. I don't know if I'm doing this right or wrong. I'm just saying things and hoping for the best. And yeah, if for whatever reason I made you want to check out this album, really go and check it out. It's really, really freaking good. It's on every platform, I assume. I think you can also find it here on YouTube. I don't know. It's on Spotify, Deezer, iTunes, Apple Music, all that crap. But yeah, thanks for giving me a chance. I hope I did something interesting. Yeah, that would be cool. Okay, remember to do the whole like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I would really appreciate it. I have a very small ego, and I need to feed it with your acceptance. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye bye.